Hello, thank you for joining me at Bert's Books. Again, I'm just going to be churning out something fairly quick rather than doing another of my scripted jobs. I'm still tinkering at a new one of those in the background, so hopefully before too long, once my usual time management skills kick into play. Anyway, I've just been for a quick visit to Southampton, and if you're familiar with my take on seaside towns, they always seem to be a good source of out-of-print pulp or old fiction. So anyway, first off, I don't think I'd ever even seen a copy of this. I'm not really sure I was even aware it was a book, but there's illustrated with a still from the Nicholas Roeg film there, Walkabout by James Vance Marshall, still wrapped, so I'll get to it. But, of course I've seen the film a number of times. I mean, it has this kind of curious position, that film. I think it's been named somewhere as one of the sort of top 50 or whatever films you're supposed to see by the time you're 14. As I've seen this is as well, kind of pitched at a young adult sort of audience, which my abiding memory of that film, and I gather I'm not alone in this, is probably not the most worthy takeaway from it. But being the age I was when I saw it, I remember that film for there was nudity in this film. Jenny Agutter obliged. I suppose I'd better check what age she was when she made it. Born 1952 it says here. But anyway, I think the first time I saw it was when I would have been probably younger than that. So that's probably to miss the broader point of this. I should maybe give this a revisit through the book and come away with a more worthy association of this story. Next up, from what year actually is this? This is from 1979, so the series would have been relatively new. I think it first aired possibly in 1978. Anyway, a Blake's 7 novelisation. Anyone out there doesn't know Blake's 7? It was BBC science fiction, sort of, I suppose, came on the heels of Doctor Who, and I think Terry Nation's name in and on this, so it involved certain of the same people behind Doctor Who, same creators and so on, studio people possibly as well. Similar budget, importantly, right? It was, I mean, if you watch it now, you're kind of struck by how cheap everything looks, but that's kind of, you didn't quibble about that in 1978. It was, it was what you got back then, and you didn't really question it. Although that device there, believe it or not, that's a weapon. That if any of you who had, if you had an elder sister or your mother might similarly have owned what I think were curling tongs, one of those implements. This device just looked weirdly similar to one of those, so that always struck me as odd. But it was a pretty decent, quite dystopian, it was a pretty dark in tone. It dealt with similar to Star Wars in a way, I suppose, but on a lot lower budget. It dealt with a situation of a interplanetary oppression, this big federation keeping everybody down, concerning itself with a little runaway group of rebels, people who'd fallen foul of it, including Blake, who, Rog, I think was his first name, that's R-O-J, Rog Blake, who disappeared a few series. Although the series kept the name, Blake himself kind of vanished a few series in, from what I remember. But I don't know if I've ever read, I don't know if the rest of the series were novelised. I don't think I've ever read a treatment. Trevor Hoyle is the author's name, Arrow Books. But I did, last I checked, a load of episodes were up on YouTube, and, I gave it a revisit, and, for all the sort of budgetary constraints, I quite enjoyed visiting it again. There's a certain level of slight campiness in some respects, but no quibble with it. I enjoy visiting Blake's Servants, so this could be all right. Next up, I think I either had this when I was about 9 or 10, or I at least borrowed it from the school library. I just remember that cover so well, and Puffin was the imprint. I think it might have been a sort of junior, it was a junior branch of Penguin Books. Puffin, at school you'd sort of periodically this catalogue would come round, and there'd be sort of budget priced, titles. I think they'd be slightly reduced, and if you could twist your mum and dad's arm, and the basis that it's healthy for you to be reading, which we know it is. So so you'd kind of get to scrape together a postal order so you could furnish yourself with some decent reading material. This one is rather loaded towards the plucky Brit and his daring do, so you might at a scrape have just called it Toodle Pip Fritzy Old Man. There are occasional variations, but I think actually there's some post-war stories. Kind of there's a couple of Iron Curtain, Korea War type scenarios at the back, but most of it is sort of Colditzy type or Stalag Luft type of chalky getting under the wires. Next, well, this is a slight departure. Law, oh cripes, oh crumbs. Sir's going to get jolly baity with me in a second. I have a copy of Bunter the Racketeer. This is a relic of a kind of bygone age in schoolboy fiction, concerning itself with the exploits of William George Bunter, or Billy Bunter, the fat owl of the remove. Yes, the fuel for these stories is old-fashioned sizist humour. These they tend to be very formulaic stories. I've got a couple of reproductions of old sort of bound reproductions of old Magnet issues, and they're very. Well, I guess they had to be formulaic because they had to churn these things out so quickly. But it's obviously set itself in the world of the boys' school. In that environment, you're either a good egg, you're either one of those kind of upstanding young gentlemen, or you're a rank outsider, a rotter, a cad, or a sort of just a duffer, as I think we can categorise Bunter. He's not going to be any good at sports, being the physique he is, and also he's kind of by nature. And I don't know if the intention was to make a connection between being less than athletic and less than upstanding, but by nature he's a devious, kind of self-serving, greedy bastard, but kind of amusing with it. I mean, that's the thing. It's he is the focal, I won't say hero, but he's the focus of these stories. That's the thing. The other kids in these, the upstanding young gents in these, the Harry Whartons, or what's the other guy, Bob Cherry, is it? The stand-up stout young chaps. They're just not very I mean, they take the piss out of Bunter and sort of pay him, just pay him back for all his transgressions and tap his napper for him, as the expression goes. But I just find them so uninteresting. They're just these little tossers. Who cares about Harry Wharton? He's a wanker. Bob Cherry can fuck off. But Bunter is much more interesting, just for being this duplicitous, just greedy oaf who always, his plans to kind of cheat his mates out of their tuck or whatever bollocks he's up to always unravels by the end of the story, and he always ends up getting a caning, and then you get all these phonetically transcribed yoop yoop yaroop sort of noises. Apparently that's the noise a punished schoolboy would have made in 1925 or something. But I don't know, they have a weird charm. They're just the kind of they're sort of a bit quaint, I suppose. Anyway, last off, this Robin Cook's Coma. Now, when I picked this up yesterday, I was in a second-hand shop, I think it was the Oxfam in Southampton, and the guy behind the counter goes, "Oh, wow, I think I read that 40 years ago." And I'm sort of going, yeah, I think I read this 40 years ago. I did. I read this probably about 1982, by which time I suppose the peak number of discarded copies were finding their way into church fairs and charity shops and whatnot. It was published in 1977. I think was filmed in 1978, so a lot of us my age have read this, or seen the film, or both. So it's the number one medical thriller of the year. From what I remember anyway, I've kind of not really I've only sort of got back into the first few pages, so probably haven't read this in 40 years or so, but from what I remember, it's just one of those really efficiently written thrillers that you get at the time. A chilling, fast-moving suspense thriller, unputdownable, says the Boston Globe. And it concerns itself with, there's this spate of patients going in for what should be routine surgery, and for inexplicable reasons are not waking up from the anaesthetic, and they're finding themselves in this particular clinic, coma clinic, and this monstrous conspiracy unfolds. Now, I delved in a few pages and it took me back to, I was at a relatively tender age, of course, when I first read this, and the first case, the first victim, the reason she finds herself in the hospital in the first place is because she's experiencing unusual problems in the lady department, lady problems. Now, the first time I picked this up, I really wasn't equipped for, I suppose I was some way into biology lessons, but I really wasn't equipped for the detail on complicated ladies' problems. So I don't know if I'm doing that much better this time, actually, if I'm fair. I've somehow come no distance at all. Well, there's food for thought. Anyway, not a bad haul. Thank you again for joining me. If you've a mind to, because I gather that's what YouTube's recently tinkered algorithm now picks up on. If you've a mind to watch some other thing than me rambling, I'll put a link. Let's see if I can rejig my recently decimated viewing stats.